to the first in a series of debates. We are going to be doing this in a formal format, which I know is going to be a little bit unusual for Twitch being what it is. But instead of your typical screaming head matches, this is going to be structured. We're going to start off with first a 1-minute introduction for both parties. We'll be starting with Rage Pope in that. Afterwards, both parties will have 5 minutes to present their opening arguments. We will then do a quick back and forth rebuttal. We're going to try and time those around 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And at which point we'll open it up to an audience Q&A. And after the audience Q&A section, we'll do closing statements. And finally, at the very end, we'll do a final straw poll. Before we start, we're going to take a straw poll at the very beginning of this debate to find out where everyone lies and see if there's any difference between the start and the finish, because we're going to use this purely for science. Should minimum wage be eliminated? Is that a fair question, gentlemen? If I say should minimum wage be eliminated, yes, no?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, then we will send this one off to everyone who's watching, everyone in the chat. So if you are in the chat, please vote for this initial straw poll, just so we can get a little sense for where everyone stands. I'm guessing I think I know where it's going to be.
Yeah, nice. I am not gonna feel bad if this goes down a little, because I think that I think that they're probably I think this is probably an audience that's friendly enough to my side of this, that I would actually be shocked if he didn't move a couple people.
But I prefer this. I would rather there be some on both sides of the fence. And also, this was actually Rage Pope's idea to do. And I like this idea because it's going to be a before and after. So, I mean, based on the current polling, Ben, you're the only one who has much to lose here. It's currently 46-5. So we got 52% of the vote, 200 viewers. Yeah, maybe we'll say, well, we got an hour, so I'll keep this poll going. I'll leave it running one last time, and then we'll do a second poll.
I think it might have been better if you put it with an undecided as well, right? Because there may be some people who aren't really sure. I mean,
it's a good idea.
Who knows? Because there may be just a lot of people sitting on the fence as well. So,
well, we don't allow for centrism here. It's just radical beliefs in either direction. Should minimum.
Yeah, don't mean to criticize your methodology.
They're already going after the moderator. All right. No, yes, undecided. There we go. All right. So ignore the results of the last poll, everybody, and then vote again. I don't think there's going to be too many undecideds, to be totally honest with you. But I mean,
yeah, I don't think so either. But I figured it'd be.
It is more scientific. You're totally right on that. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this. Everyone, hopefully get the poll. This will be the last time I do the opening poll, but we'll leave this one running in the background. But we are a little pressed for time, so we're going to get started. And it's, I think, virtually the exact same. Yeah, so we're at about a 92% in favor of not eliminating elimination. Oh, there was one undecided. Well, good suggestion. Well, I'm serious.
We found him. Get him out.
Exactly.
Nice. We have something to fight over.
All right. So why don't we start this show? We're going to do the 1-minute introduction, starting with you, Rage Pope. You may begin.
Great. So I'm Rage Pope. I am a streamer on Twitch. I generally read the news during the weekdays, and then on the weekends I play random video games. I stream mostly for fun, and if you guys learn something, well, I hope that's pretty good. That's about it for me.
Do you want to plug your Twitch stream?
Oh, yeah, www.twitch.tv/RagePope.
Okay. And now we'll reset the clock. 1 minute to you, Ben Burgess.
All right. So my name is Ben Burgess. Wrote a book called Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. I should also plug, since it's going to be coming out in a few months, I think, a book called Myth and Mayhem, a leftist response to Jordan Peterson, which I co-wrote with Matt McManus, Conrad Hamilton, and Marion Trejo, and there's an introduction by Slavoj Žižek. And that's not available for pre-order or anything just yet, but keep an eye out. I also write for Jacobin, and I just started a deal as a twice-a-month columnist for Arc Digital Media. I also do a Patreon where there are essays twice a week.
10 seconds.
And I don't think I've played a video game since Pac-Man.
Oh, nicely done. All right, we are going to start with the opening argument. You have 5 minutes on the clock. Rage vote.
Wouldn't it be great if everyone was able to afford rent and groceries? What Ben Burgess is about to tell you is that the best, fastest, and only way to improve the working poor's lives is by increasing the minimum wage, presumably to $20. We can argue until we're blue in the face if a worker should have to work 20 or 40 or 60 hours in order to provide for themselves and their family, and we can argue about whether or not they deserve to have 500 channels of cable and an HBO subscription. The question that Ben Burgess and most of the left ask is, will raising the minimum wage provide a net benefit to those who earn it? The answer is a boring, probably yes for those who are fortunate enough to still be employed after the increase, but the question itself is not the one we should be asking. The two largest earners of the minimum wage are teens and tipped employers, for whom unemployment effects are irrelevant or tangentially related to the more important policy question. Do higher minimum wages help low-income families? Their answer is a resounding no. The study's minimum wage advocate site masks large gross effects for the most vulnerable of low-income earners, specifically older workers who are more likely to be significant contributors to their family's income and young workers looking to take the first step in their career. Real poverty comes from not having a job and having no chance to climb your career ladder. An increased minimum wage has the added negative effect of making it harder for immigrants to find labor and begin integration into the United States economy. While I don't believe Ben or most other proponents of the minimum wage have the same nasty undertones, I think it's very important to consider its historical roots and the effects it has today. In fact, the origin of a minimum wage was deeply rooted in racism, with Harvard professor Arthur Holcomb explicitly stating the intent of minimum wage laws is to, and I quote, protect white standards of living from the invidious competition of the colored races. Sidney Webb, co-founder of the London School of Economics, wrote that of all the ways dealing with these unfortunate parasites, the most ruinous of the community is to allow them to unrestrainedly compete as wage earners. The minimum wage protects deserving workers from the competition of the unfit by making it illegal to work for less now. The same rhetoric has been used by apartheid unions in South Africa, American unions in the 1930s, and eugenics movements around the globe. Ben likes to tout the fact that an increased minimum wage leads to less job turnover. Ben suggests this is positive because workers don't have to spend time or energy in the stress of a job hunt. However, this is actually a terrible fate. Lower job turnover means that employers are stuck in their minimum wage positions for longer periods of time and decrease the probability of them finding a better paying job. This is problematic because most minimum wage jobs aren't a dead end, but rather the first step on a ladder. The claim Ben makes is the opposite of what we would want to see. The preponderance of evidence shows that the minimum wage increases result in rising wealth and income inequality by taking jobs away from those at the steepest part of the wage experience profile. 40% of minimum wage workers get a raise in 4 months and about 2/3 within a year. The median wage increase for these workers is non-trivial at 20%. When the minimum wage increased from $5.15 to $7.25, earners with no college degrees saw a 33 to 50% reduction in the probability of earning $8.66 an hour within 4 years. Earners with some college education saw a 17% reduction in the probability of earning that same $8.66 an hour. These minimum wage increases cripple the earnings of low-skilled workers by reducing their pay over the entirety of their career. Even if we take the assumption that increasing the minimum wage does not decrease unemployment, it still punishes low-income families. It's a gross oversimplification to say that employers will bear the entire burden of minimum wage increases. The net effect of an increase in minimum wage is a regressive value-added tax on the lowest income earners. This is because cost increases are partially passed through to consumers in the form of increased prices. Employers also offset labor costs by reducing fringe benefits such as healthcare, free parking, and flexible scheduling. These effects are more concentrated in workplaces with fewer high-wage workers, which again targets poor families. Before we let Ben muddy the waters by citing meta-studies which fail to account for the growing precision of data and econometric techniques, including triple differences in synthetic controls, let's first debunk the debunker. One egregious example of Ben's misfortune is a study he references 3 times as a major European study, showing that literally, and this is based on data from a bunch of different countries, for every dollar increase in the minimum wage, there's an increase in the life expectancy of the working poor. Unfortunately for Ben, the sole author is from the University of West Florida, and his contact information is in the first column of the paper. To be fair to Ben, Otto Lenhart does sound European. Furthermore, the claim he makes that increasing the minimum wage increases the life expectancy of the working poor is simply not supported by the econometric model, which instead of using the minimum wage as an independent variable, uses the Cates index. You can show the graphic. So imagine a society with 10 people. One person earns $10, the minimum wage, the second 20, the third 30, and so on until the 10th person earns $100. Now we create a second society where we take away all the money people earn above $20 and burn it, leading to wages of one person at $10 and 9 people at $20. The second society has a CATE index 2.6 times greater than the previous society, and is ceteris paribus correlated with better health outcomes, although we objectively know that the society
and that's time.
So that's 2/3. All right.
Okay, thank you, Rage Pope. We are now going to turn the tables. 5 minutes will be on you, Ben Burgess.
All right. So there are a lot of different reasons to support an increase in the minimum wage. Since I don't want to run out of time, and I know I tend to blather on and on, I'm going to try to just run through them all really quickly before expanding on anything. So first, and I realize this is the sort of most ideological reason I have for it. So if you don't start off, making socialist assumptions, this won't move you. But increasing the minimum wage reduces the rate of exploitation in businesses. Unlike solutions like Yang Bucks or an increased earned income tax credit, by which society as a whole subsidizes the business practices of employers who pay poverty wages, increasing the minimum wage lets workers keep more of the value they themselves produce by their labor. It doesn't require them to fill out more complicated tax forms that make them more likely to be audited. Speaking of which, parasitic tax preparation companies eat up a huge portion of earned income tax credit refunds to working poor. Again, increasing the minimum wage is a fairer, better, and more just solution. 3, increase the minimum wage incentivizes businesses to be organized as worker cooperatives. If I'm starting a business that's going to generate $36 an hour and I need 2 people to help me run the place full time, if I have to pay them each $15, I only have 6 left for myself. And some of this varies state by state and depends on the legal form taken by the cooperative, but it does give me an incentive to bring them in as partners in some sort of cooperative arrangement so we could each take home $12 an hour, because that wouldn't be affected because it wouldn't be wages. Increasing the minimum wage helps close the racial wealth gap. Only 42% of American workers as a whole make less than 15, but that includes 54% of Black and 60% of Latino workers. Similarly, it helps close the wage gap between men and women, since 48% of women make less than 15, and a lot of the jobs you'll find in a list of professions that make less than that on average are coded as traditionally female: nursing assistants, wait staff, personal care aides, etc. Increasing the minimum wage decreases financial stress for the working poor, which can be reasonably be expected to make it easier to maintain relationships. Right-wing nonsense about the success sequence gets this cause and effect of this backwards. And it's better for relationships between parents and children. Research shows that minimum wage increases lead to lower teen pregnancy and lower rates of child maltreatment, especially lower rates of child neglect. This reduction in stress also leads to reduction in smoking. It leads, according to that study, that apparently we're not supposed to take seriously because the author teaches in Florida, which I guess I understand. I used to live in Florida. I get it. But it does, despite the Florida residents of the author incorporate 30 years of data from 2 dozen OECD countries, leads to a reduction in diabetes, heart attack, stroke, diseases of the circulatory digestive system, all things that are associated with poverty and stress. And as was mentioned, life expectancy. Finally, and maybe most significantly from my perspective, sufficiently large increases in the minimum wage allow workers who would otherwise live paycheck to paycheck to put some money in the bank, which is good in itself for the quality of life, but also significantly improves their personal freedom. Want to get a tattoo, march in a political protest, dye your hair, smoke, express controversial opinions on social media? Employees in American workplaces are routinely hesitant about doing every single thing on that list because they worry that if their boss doesn't like it, they might lose their jobs. With some money in the bank, that threat loses at least some of its force, and people regain at least a little bit more control over their lives.
Okay, thank you, Ben. We are now going to start the back and forth. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Rage Pope. Rage Pope, are you there?
Sorry, I guess the first thing that I want to do is go back to the point that the author was from Florida. The point that I was trying to make wasn't that the author is from West Florida, so the study should be discredited, but rather that Ben didn't take the time to read the study itself, and he didn't actually fully understand the econometric model that it was arguing over. The big difference in the literature that we're seeing actually right now isn't an argument over whether or not there are, benefits for closing income inequality. The argument in the literature is over how we're appropriately controlling for controls in minimum wage. So the study that he actually cited was showing that in countries with lower amounts of income inequality that you had all these health benefits. It just so happens that tangentially that minimum wage happens to be in the numerator, but that's not actually what the study was measuring. There is no independent variable of a minimum wage and seeing how that impact follows through to the other things. The second thing that I want to point out is that if we're looking at the effectiveness of the earned income tax credit versus what's happening with the minimum wage. So even though, yes, there is some money that is going to parasitic tax preparers, and we can probably both agree that the government itself should be the one responsible for delivering these mostly basic tax returns, and the money shouldn't be going there. But dollar for dollar spent, it's significantly better to go to an earned income tax credit, EBITC, so that's an earned benefit. Sorry, I'm getting got a little bit nervous. It's an earned and benefit earned and basic income tax credit. So for $62 billion over 10 years, it would lift 1.1 million people out of poverty. If we expanded it to $123 billion over 10 years, that would lift 2.3 million people out of poverty. The big problem with the studies that Ben and his similar like to cite, they're big cohort studies which don't show the actual problems happening to people, which is losing a job, not having a job. There's a lot of effects that the employers do to kind of get around it. So they'll take away your health insurance, they'll take away other payment, they'll take away they'll cut your hours, which may be beneficially good, marginally good, but I don't know. For the individual who's losing their job, it's really hard to say that that's more problematic. All right, that's it. Fuck.
That was actually perfect timing. It just ended at 2:30. All right, Ben, 2 minutes 30 seconds. Back to you.
All right, nice. So as far as the study goes, I've seen. I actually double checked after he said that and looked at the article where I can remember citing it, and I certainly didn't say anything in there about the Europeanness or not. It's possible that I screwed that up in the Michael Brooks segment, but in any case, looking at the abstract now, and it certainly does take the minimum wage as an independent variable. So that's just not true. That it doesn't. But I want to go back to the opening statement and hit a few points there.
It hits the Kate index.
Okay. You'll get your turn next. So I want to go back to the opening statement and sort of try to hit a few things in order that I want to make sure aren't lost here. So first of all, the something called the genetic fallacy, which is a form of ad hominem, right, to the man when you're arguing against the person and taking these considerations about the person that are irrelevant as a reason to reject the idea, is being committed when you say that racist arguments were at one point made for the minimum wage. That racist arguments were made, as in fact I think you'll find it's a white supremacist country, especially before about the mid-20th century. You'll be hard pressed to find any popular policy for which racist arguments weren't made, and it doesn't mean that there weren't other non-racist arguments that are convincing that were made for it. Certainly direct arguments about poverty and income inequality and the rest. The fact that somebody might get a raise from 5.15 to 7.25 is nice. It's not going to be nearly as nice for them as a raise from that to $15 an hour or $20 an hour. As far as cut health insurance, I have a very hard time imagining a scenario in which we get a Congress that is willing to do $15 an hour, nationally, without also imposing single payer health insurance. As far as cut hours, there's, if you look at the meta studies.
Okay, that's time, Ben. But I'll give you an extra 10 seconds because you kind of got interrupted a little bit there. But could you use 10 seconds, or should I just move it over?
Yeah. So let's just use the 10 seconds to say let's put a pin in cut hours and
10 seconds.
And Alabama Studies next round.
Okay, Rach Pope, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, go.
Okay, so I think the best example of these kind of areas are kind of Seattle and San Francisco. The minimum wage workers most often compete against teenagers. And these two cities are the two cities in the United States with the highest percentage of them being or with the highest percentage of or the lowest percentage of teens. So there's a much less of the usual workforce going in against them. Their reservation wage is near zero because they generally take these jobs for the experience, and they have a parental safety net, which crowds out the truly poor. If you kind of look at what actually happened in Seattle, there was a net $8 to $12 per week raise, or a kind of like a wage raise kind of to everybody who was originally working. But of those $8 to $12 that these workers got per week, 25% of it, between $2 and $3, was due to workers having to relocate outside of King County. The losers were actually the people trying to get in on the first step of the job rung. There's a substantial number of people all around the country who have been unable to find jobs and are unable to kind of make their own way. These kind of unemployment effects aren't directly showed up because don't directly show up in the studies because they're just not in the labor force. They've never had a job, held a job, and now even though they're searching and unable to get it, they're just not able to find it. If you kind of look at the data that's saying that there's not actually job loss, well, those studies were very limited in scope to restaurant workers. Some of the Berkeley studies specifically looked at restaurant workers. They failed to control for the fact that the restaurant industry was expanding at the same time. So while there was the same number of minimum wage jobs, you would have expected that there would have been more kind of minimum wage work available. In terms of talking about the racist points, I don't believe anybody currently is racist, but I still believe there might be a few people out there who are. I just wanted to put that in for some sort of contextual point. So, and then I guess to the point, an argument that $15 any Congress that'll pass a $15 minimum wage won't do national health care as well. Well, I think that's kind of irrelevant, right? Why are these two things linked? You can't just argue that because of one thing is going to get passed, the other one's going to be as well. So,
and that's time. All right, Ben, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, go. Ben, you're muted.
I'm a little confused about the last claim that it's irrelevant that the circumstances under which we're likely to implement a $15 minimum wage are also circumstances under which we're likely to implement Medicare for all. That seems extremely relevant. And if in fact it's the case that we have to just talk about minimum wage or no minimum wage, and not talk about other policies that that you could also combine with either of those, then we also shouldn't have been talking about earned income tax credit or UBI or anything like that. Now you can nitpick like the University of Washington study showing no adverse minimum wage, no adverse employment effects in Seattle. That even those workers who did get their hours cut, who were tended to be part-time, they still got the same overall income. It was just the same income for fewer hours, which is a win by any possible measurement. And they have, and you can say, okay, it didn't control for this, it didn't control for that. There's the studies, there are effects that might not show up in the studies, but in that case, I'm skeptical about how we can have solid statistical evidence of effects that don't show up in the studies. And really quick about why you want to look at the meta studies, because you can have individual studies that point in wildly different directions, as in fact you do on the minimum wage. You can have individual studies where you have within whatever relatively small pool was looked at, all kinds of crazy effects. This is how people end up believing through popular science reporting of individual studies that plants can think and coffee cures cancer. What you want, if you want empirically well-grounded beliefs, you have to look at the meta-studies and the serious ones that incorporate massive amounts of information, and not the cherry-picked ones you tend to see be favored by minimum wage critics who take the five studies that they like and disregard everything else.
Okay. Back to you, Rach Pope. These will be the two closing rebuttals, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's very important to look at what these meta studies are valuing. So the first is a lot of them include a lot of literature pre-2000. We didn't have the kind of mass data collection that we saw with the $5 an hour to $7 an hour minimum wage increase. These studies are largely longitudinal and they don't have the appropriate data precision that we have, such as in Seattle, where we have actually worker by worker, how many hours they worked every quarter and where they worked. The second thing that you want to look at is a lot of these older studies kind of use long-term data, which is actually very bad. Because what we see is with minimum wage increases, we see substitution effects towards automation and towards reduction of fringe benefits. And kind of as businesses see how they can optimize their labor by reducing labor, such as by importing chopped onions instead of paying for a prep cook to do it, those things kind of trickle out into the outside industry, and then you lose your controls. And the second thing that Ben talks about is you need to look at the meta studies, not the individual studies. Well, when the individual studies themselves are using improper controls, such as arbitrarily choosing nearby counties instead of using newer econometric techniques, such as synthetic controls, I believe that came out in the early 2010s. When you don't have these appropriate statistical controls, the studies kind of become invalidated and outdated. It's not to say that you shouldn't look at the studies on both sides, but the overwhelming amount of empirical evidence that's coming out is in favor of these synthetic controls being greatly superior to the arbitrary controls being used in these earlier studies. And it's very important to look at the latest literature, of which the majority of it is coming out in favor of the minimum wage. The argument right now in the econometric community is not why minimum wage decreases job growth. It's that why are the econometric techniques that we're using, why are they showing zero when we would expect theoretically, and that we know from all the business surveys we send out to businesses who say they are directly cutting jobs or substituting out, are having these sorts of effects.
Okay, we'll switch it over to you, Ben. 2 minutes and 30, final rebuttal. You're muted again, Matt.
Okay, I think the reason that there's that you're going to get a big gap with the surveys is that employers who resent, understandably from their point of view, the lower profits that result from that money being redistributed into their employees' wages, routinely make empty threats. They grumble, maybe even they sincerely believe that they're going to do these things, but as it happens, in fact, we've seen a lot of this in the Seattle case. People say, "Oh, we're going to close," because minimum wage increase, and then they kind of don't end up doing it over time. But the 2 points that I wanted to make really sure that I hit here were one, we just touched in that last statement about automation, and I think that if that's your concern, the hope that the cost of human labor can win a race to the bottom with machine replacements as the technology progresses is a lost cause. Whereas the kind of movement that could achieve a national $15, $20 an hour minimum wage might also be able to achieve things like, a great national reduction like we've seen in France or Finland in the work week, a company with no loss in salary, which would be a much more rational response to the threat of automation. Finally, as I was kind of expecting, what always happens in minimum wage debates has been happening here, which is that we end up spending way too much time talking about unemployment when this is not decisive, right? So I've given some indication of the reasons to think that the unemployment effects are greatly exaggerated at best, that a lot of the best research shows that there's really no basis for a lot of these concerns. But even if that weren't the case, that doesn't mean that working families, working poor families aren't going to benefit overall, that there aren't going to be many, many more than losers. If 93% of people earning less than $15 an hour, often significantly less, have have a pay increase and at a few percentage lose their job.
Ben.
That's very unfortunate, but that is still a net increase, and there are solutions.
Okay. All right, everybody. We're going to be doing some audience Q&A. Some of these are for both of you. One or two of them has been for the individuals. So what I'll do is I'll do the ones for both of you first, and then I'll give each of you 1 minute to respond. Does 1 minute sound good, or would you like more time?
1 minute.
A minute sounds fine.
Okay, so we'll start with you, Rage Pope. And this question is to both of you. Why has Walmart been lobbying for a higher minimum wage since 2005? And you got 1 minute to respond.
So what you'll see is that large corporations are better able to handle the higher cost of minimum wage. If you look at the cost, essentially, of all their goods, the capital that they require to the amount of labor they need, these big mega corporations are better able to handle it. And these industries that are razor thin margins, such as food service, which is 2.5%, I think Walmart's is 3%, they can absorb that cost much more than a local mom and pop store. And after those are driven out, Walmart and the like will kind of reign supreme. So.
Okay. Ben, 1 minute on the clock. Go.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with my rage-filled friend here. That I think that it is the case that many small businesses rely on a very low minimum wage to prop up their business model because they wouldn't be able to survive if they had to pay living wages. Given the lack of empirical evidence that the small businesses going under is bad for employment overall, what that actually means is that market share is gobbled up by large businesses, which often micromanage less, give higher benefits, are much easier to unionize, and of course, a positive from my perspective, ultimately much easier to nationalize.
Can I respond to one thing you said real quick?
Absolutely. I'll give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important to note is living wage implies that all the employers are responsible for more than just paying the employees for the work they do. So it's saying that we should pay a single mother of two more than one with like a working spouse or like a single male. And I think that kind of pushes the responsibility of the safety net off to like, there should be a responsibility of everybody in the country, not just their specific employer, right?
Okay, well, Ben, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Okay, my answer to the right is no, and I also don't think it does mean that. I think that I think saying you should pay a living wage, even though of course it is true that different workers have different needs, but it's just not true that what most people mean by that is that you should have employment adjustments based on these factors. I'd also go back to the very first point I made about workers creating the value that's been returned to them in wages. And I think that the effect of these proposals to sort of shove it off onto society as a whole
that's time.
Is to subsidize a high rate of exploitation.
Okay, next question. This one will go to both of you. We'll do the same thing, 1 minute each. And we'll start with you, Rage Pope. Thoughts on a maximum wage? Go.
Well, I don't really think a maximum wage is really going to help all that much, right? If we went to Walmart and we just took all of their exec CEOs' pay, that's not going to it's not going to put a scratch into the $15 minimum wage, right? And then the problem is you're going to have essentially the labor flight of the very, very like most in demand overseas. I don't think that's going to cause them to do anything, right? And then even if you do a maximum wage, well, then they're just going to do compensation in kind like they do now. Most of the executive wage, I believe, is paid through like stock options and other kind of similar in kind benefits that wouldn't be subject to the maximum wage anyways, right?
Okay, Ben, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, so my understanding of maximum wage proposals, or at least the ones I'm familiar with, like the late David McReynolds was proposing this when he was running for president in 2000, is that it wouldn't be that you'd have like a certain number, like a certain dollar level maximum wage. It would be that it would be illegal to pay the highest paid executive more than like a certain number of times more than the salary of the lowest paid worker, and I think that actually might do some good despite the workarounds that were just mentioned. And I'm very unworried about executive labor flight. I think that that would be a nice demonstration of exactly how unnecessary the skills of a lot of highly compensated executives are.
Yeah. Oh, I've got one more point to make here. I just remembered this. So
sure. I'll throw 30 seconds on the clock, okay?
Okay, thank you. So if we take two companies, let's say one is a high-tech startup. We have 10 machine learning employees and their CEO. The machine learners make $100,000, and then their CEO makes 10 times that at $1 million, right? And then we have another company where we have 50,000 janitors, and then one guy who oversees them. Well, the guy who's overseeing 50,000 janitors probably has a lot more stressful job and probably provides a lot more than the one in the CEO or than the one in the high tech industry, but his pay would be capped, whereas the other guy would be making a lot more money for doing an easier job. So.
Okay. Alrighty. What we're going to do now, some of these are specific questions to both of you. Ben, the first one's going to be directly to you. So do you want to... Do you want 30 seconds? Yeah, do you want 30 seconds to respond?
Yeah.
And then, okay. All right. Then I'll reduce the amount of time you get to answer the question as well then. All right? 30 seconds.
All right. Given the already obscene compensation rates of CEOs, my heart does not bleed for that guy described in the last example.
Well, it was just 10 seconds worth. Okay, so this question I believe is to you, Ben. So I'm going to give Rach Pope a specific question afterwards as well. Ask Ben if he's in favor of eliminating the minimum wage if we also eliminate capitalism. Okay, and then if you'd like, Rach Pope, do you want to be able to respond to his answer? I guess wait till you hear the answer, and then you can see if you'd like to use the time to respond to it. Okay, so 1 minute, Ben.
I guess it would depend on what we replaced it with, would be the short answer. To just really quickly expand on that a little bit. If the idea is that we were, if we replaced capitalism with a system that was like in a really robust way based on workers' control of the means of production, then I could see a case that at that point, however people sort of democratically decided to divvy it up might be okay, and that like a minimum wage law would be redundant. But if we were replacing it with something that was predominantly based on state ownership, where there was still a pretty robust employer-employee distinction, it was just like run through the state, then I think a minimum wage law would still be very necessary under those circumstances.
Okay, that's time. Would you like to respond to that, Rach Pope, or would you like to just take a separate question? Rach?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself.
No
you can go ahead and give me a question. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so this was the last question. I don't know if this one is just going to be a freebie to you, but you can decide whether or not you want to answer it. When does the more winners than losers argument end? Does it start with $15 an hour, then $20 an hour, then $50 an hour, then $100 an hour, then what, $1,000 an hour?
Well, I mean, that's kind of like a main question, right? But the answer is still kind of there, is like you kind of see these small effects that are kind of immeasurable, especially when you're phasing in minimum wage $1 at a time. Instead of seeing the gross disemployment effects that you would see if you just jumped it to $1,000, it masks itself by selectively not hiring certain people, right? Mostly the new people on the job ladder. And it takes years for this to kind of manifest throughout the whole work profile. I think another important thing to kind of note is with this higher minimum wage, it's a lot easier to hide your own discriminatory actions. If you choose to say not hire certain minorities, you can just say, oh, it's because of wages. And it's a lot harder to show that when there's 1,000 applicants for a job rather than just one or two. And so I think that's a pretty big negative there as well.
Ben, would you like to respond to that? You're muted, Ben.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that last argument, but maybe they're, but anyway, I just want to note that.
I guess if you increase like the minimum wage to say $1,000 an hour or whatever, you're going to have significantly more applicants.
Oh, okay.
And then you can
do you want 30 seconds to respond to that, Ben?
Or? I guess I would just say, as far as the original question goes, to the extent that it was a where do you draw the line question, I think we should generally not expect to be able to draw really precise lines. Here's exactly where more winners than losers stops kicking in, and that's not a disadvantage. That's just true generally of interesting concepts. Instead of trying to go on and on about it now, I just say, if you're interested in this, read the Jacobin article I wrote about Rashida Tlaib's $20 an hour proposal, and I blather on about it there.
Rage, would you like to respond to that, or should we move on to the next
No,
section?
that's fine. We can go to the next one.
Okay, so we're going to enter the final section. This will allow both of you 5 minutes to give your closing arguments. We'll be starting with you, Rage Pope. Because the audience questions, we actually have an extra 5 minutes of time. Did you want to both be able to do a rebuttal or end it just with your closing arguments?
I mean, we can do another audience question, or we can just do the closing, or I'm up for whatever.
Ben, what do you feel?
I mean, you don't have a strong preference one way or the other?
No.
Okay. No, let's just go into the closing statements.
All right, you got 5 minutes on the clock. Go, Rage Pope.
Sure. I guess I kind of want to summarize my argument by saying the minimum wage doesn't really truly affect people in poverty because, again, the largest earners are teens and tipped employees. There's not a lot of wage gain. Even when it is found to be positive, it's very insignificant, maybe a 3% gain for those who are fortunate enough to still earn it. But you don't have the long run effects of people aren't entering the workforce, they aren't getting the experience, and they aren't able to earn more money later on down the line. I don't think it's fair to say that minimum wage is binding for these families or for low-income earners, as only 17% actually are below the federal poverty level. So a lot of the people who are actually benefiting from this are people 3 times above the poverty line. I think a lot of these issues that we have with wealth and income inequality are being addressed through minimum wage, which is an overly blunt tool. There's 4 kind of ways that we can address it and better. So there's the earned income tax credit, the earned basic income tax credit, universal basic income, and a negative income tax, which all have a much more targeted effect on people, or on actual low wage families. The labor costs are being offset with reductions in other fringe benefits. The healthcare effects are kind of the most extreme in low-paying jobs, with every dollar of minimum wage increase leading to a 2 to 4% reduction in probability of very low or low-income earners' chance of health coverage. Many low-wage, low-skilled earners are the ones most likely to lose those benefits. There's a lot of effects in unbound economies such as Seattle and San Francisco, which causes workers to be less likely to lose jobs due to geolocation. A $15 hour minimum wage in Seattle is significantly different than one being implemented in the Midwest. An increase in minimum wage will lead to an increase in automation and offshoring. And we can even see in the limited time we have in Seattle that a lot of restaurants have actually switched over from a waiter model to a self-serve model where you go and implement your order on a tablet instead. So while the restaurants still remain open, they switch to less labor-intensive practices in order to cut labor costs. And then these gains will kind of reflect around the country as more of these low-paid entry-level jobs kind of get left out. The benefits of the EITC, EBITC, NIT, UBI, all these sort of tax effects, there are significant cost savings in wealth transfers because the government can't really properly differentiate between who actually needs the minimum wage money, so to speak, and who doesn't. And it doesn't distort labor markets and prevent people from otherwise being able to work. If you look to Seattle, there is actually a group, Pioneer Human Services, who has lobbied unsuccessfully for an exemption. They put ex-felons to work, and which is actually something that we would want is for ex-felons to be able to work. But when you increase the price of labor, well, businesses are less willing to put these people into work. And if you look at labor unions around San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, to name others, they've also lobbied as well for their entry-level employees to have exemptions to the minimum wage, because they too understand that increasing the minimum wage is going to reduce the amount of people or the amount of experience their early laborers get, because they just don't provide enough value to businesses. I think it's I think the worst kind of thing is the high profit margin industries that Ben Burgess kind of goes against: pharmaceuticals, finance, technology businesses. They really don't have a lot of low wage workers. The low wage workers tend to be in low margin industries such as manufacturing, who are going to push them out, and then there just won't be any jobs available for them at all. I'd say it's a lot more freeing to at least be able to work for some of your income than just be entirely relying on the government for the rest of your life, because your entry level positions have opportunities have been taken away from you. If we look at a cross-country analysis, Greece, Spain, Italy, France, the minimum wage there is 8, 10, 12, 15 euros an hour. The youth employment there is between 40 and 60%. You see in Greece specifically, there's a huge shift in hiring of 23 and 24 years old. And then as soon as they turn 25, they get fired because the minimum wage there increases dramatically. And so denying people these early career opportunities is probably the worst thing you can do to society. Oops.
Are you done, Rich?
No, I clicked out of something. So
no
I think the minimum wage doesn't in itself make the world a better place. It hurts the lives of the poorest American families and the workers who are those in those families. It attacks the effects of economic change rather than doing anything about the underlying causes.
Okay, so that's time, but I'll give you 10 more seconds because I kind of interrupted you for a second. So 10 more seconds to close off.
Good intentions don't make good policies, and it's wishful thinking to think the blunt instrument of minimum wage can solve the heavily nuanced problem of poverty, and we need more than that to fight our very real problems in America.
Okay, Ben, 5 minutes, closing statement.
All right. So it's overwhelmingly clear that the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of people who are affected by minimum wage increases, certainly the vast majority of people who'd be affected by a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour would benefit from it. That even if you look at the the predictions of skeptics, the Congressional Budget Office, which has been has a report saying that it would lead to significant job effects that's been widely touted by minimum wage critics, they still say 93% of people currently earning less than $15 an hour would be earning earning $15 an hour no more. They would still have their jobs. So the megalomaniac, the obsessive fixation on employment effects as opposed to all other effects is really distorts the debate, and it's not mostly what we should be talking about. Most what we should be talking about is the fact that in fact the blunt instrument of giving people who are poor more money does work remarkably well. That for reasons that I outlined earlier, this is a much better way to do it than increasing the earned income tax credit or having Yang bucks or anything of the kind. Even if we do see the kind of unemployment effects that the most alarmist critics predict, other social democratic policies could easily offset that. In fact, for example, according to the Congressional Budget Office estimates, we'd see the 1.3 million people at least temporarily lose their jobs. That's 7% of people currently earning less than $15 an hour. And if we're going to transition to a green economy in time to save us all, we are going to need way more than 1.3 million people in federal jobs working on that energy transition. And the idea that there's anything we could possibly do to make human labor, cheaper than machines in the long run, given the pace of technological development, is wishful thinking. Even if we reinstituted slavery so they didn't have to pay us anything at all, the cost of feeding and housing humans and posting guards so we didn't escape would still be more than that tablet to take your order at the restaurant. So I think automation-based arguments to increasing the minimum wage should be looked at with particularly heavy amounts of side eye. Letting people keep a greater portion of the value that they create is by far the best of the proposals to alleviate the condition of the working poor.
All right, thank you very much, Ben. You still had 2 minutes left. Did you want to use those for anything else, or?
Nope. I'm going to uncharacteristically remain pissed.
All right, now the part you've all been waiting for. We're going to once again do the unscientific straw poll to see where everyone's hearts and minds lie. So I guess I'll ask the exact same question. Should minimum wage be eliminated? And then we'll let you both do the pluggy plugs. Should minimum wage be eliminated? No. Yes. Undecided. Got to remember to keep undecided in there. And I suppose if you want, the both of you could vote as well. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to complain too much about that. All right, all 220 people watching right now, please go click on the straw poll. So the initial vote for the first one, let's pull that out, was... Sorry, I'm going to be covering your faces up a little bit here. Should minimum wage be eliminated? Of 143 people, no got 60 votes, yes got 10 votes, undecided got 73 votes. Wow, it's a really good thing we had undecided in there. Good suggestion, Rage Pope. And now...
I think you put a typo in the name of the poll.
What did I say? Oh, should
minimum
be
be
eliminated? Minimum what? Minimum what? It's minimum wage, everybody, so... well, to find other people's minds got changed. That's kind of the idea of using the straw poll in the first place. So of the 200 voters, we got 77 so far. No has 60 votes. Yes has 13 votes, and undecided. Of the ratios, it seems that way less people are undecided now. And how did we get so many undecided votes in that last one? We had more undecided votes than we did yes or no. I
don't know. Is there like a capture or something? Maybe someone just like botted it for the laughs.
Oh, that could be. That seems unusual. I'm too small of a streamer.
Yeah.
So it seems like the no's have it as far as the unscientific poll goes. Why don't I start with this? Thank you both so much for this, by the way. This was an absolute pleasure. I think this is the first time we've done a debate on Twitch that wasn't the screaming head match style of debate, so that was very refreshing. So why don't I use this as an opportunity to both give you a chance to plug yourselves. We'll start with you, Rage.
Yeah, you can find me at www.twitch.tv/ragepope. I generally, again, just talk about news during the week and play video games during the weekend.
Cool. And Ben?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Patreon. Both of those are just Ben Burgis, BenBurgis. Jacobin, Arc Digital Media, and the Michael Brooks Show. And I don't know, I was going to make some sort of Rage Bishop or Rage Cardinal joke, but you know, it didn't quite come together.
What about websites? Do you want to plug any websites like youtube.com/Ben Burgis or things like that?
No. I think the places that I mentioned are a pretty good list.
Okay.
Did you enjoy what you just watched and now crave more nectar of the damned? Did you know that if you're watching on YouTube, you're only getting half the surfy experience? We upload all of our content commercial and censorship-free to our Patreon. Due to the general demonetization of our videos, we now upload half of our original content directly to those who can help us produce this show. Want even more nectar than that? Well, come join us at twitch.tv/TheSerfsTV, where we do weekly live streams, debates, interviews, AMAs, and more. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can help support our show 100% free by subscribing to our Twitch channel. So come join us, be merry, and know that your support is helping us do great things.
Like pay rent and eat. We would first and foremost like to thank our god, Nicholas Marks. We worship at your temple. We would like to thank our monarch, Elsie Hupp. Your generosity has made this entire thing possible. We would like to thank our lords, Ricky Pilgrim, I'm Raft, and Michaela Schmidt. You are the pillars of our organization. To our Knights of the Surf Table, Paul Parfit, Daniel Kahn, Fair Tahan, Clement Chutzkoff, Schizosaurus, Josh Mickelson, Dr. Zayas, Cooper Pilot, Andre Lynn Epperly, Dylan Bith, Terry, Todd Buckingham, Jed Lewis, Todd Lajeunesse.